Good evening, dear listeners, and a very warm welcome to you all. Wherever you are tuning in from tonight, maybe cozied up in bed, listening from your favorite quiet corner at home, or perhaps relaxing somewhere peaceful with the world fading away outside. I'm so glad you've joined me here. Take a slow, deep breath. Let your shoulders drop. Maybe pull the covers up a bit higher and feel the day gently slip away. Let the story begin. It was a crisp autumn evening in 1887 London when the yellow fog wrapped the gas lamps like a damp shroud. I had rarely seen Holmes so energized, pacing our Baker Street rooms with that familiar gleam in his eyes. Then came the urgent telegram. Sir Reginald Ashcroft, a wealthy art collector, had collapsed and died within minutes while viewing a dazzling golden portrait at a fashionable photographer's studio on Regent Street. Was it a tragic accident with dangerous chemicals, or cold-blooded murder disguised as art? Scotland Yard called it misfortune. Holmes, however, saw what others missed: a luminous portrait hiding deadly secrets. Within the hour, we were racing through the foggy streets toward a mystery far darker than its golden glow suggested. Chapter 1. A case presents itself. It was a crisp autumn in London, 1887, when the yellow fog clung thick to the gas lamps like damp wool, muffling the ceaseless rattle of hansom cabs and the hoarse cries of costermongers in the streets below. The air carried the sharp bite of coal smoke mixed with the earthy scent of fallen leaves from nearby parks and a faint, debriny tang drifting up from the distant Thames. Inside our rooms, at 221B Baker Street, the fire crackled warmly, casting flickering shadows across the Persian rug and the walls lined with chemical bottles and stacked volumes. I had not seen Holmes so energized in weeks. He paced the sitting room with quick, restless steps, his grey eyes gleaming as he paused now and then to steeple his long fingers or draw on his pipe, sending fragrant curls of Latakia tobacco into the air. Its rich, spicy aroma mingled pleasantly with the buttery scent of Mrs. Hudson's fresh scones on the table. Then the telegram arrived. A breathless boy in a patched jacket delivered it, his boots leaving damp, muddy prints on the stairs that carried the wet stone smell of the pavement outside. Holmes tore open the envelope with impatient fingers. Miss scanned the message once and tossed it across to me. The paper felt crisp and slightly cool to the touch. "Read it aloud, Watson," he said, his voice sharp with interest. I cleared my throat. Urgent. Death at studio of Henri Duval, Regent Street. Sir Reginald Ashcroft collapsed during private viewing of golden portrait, suspected poisoning by developing chemicals. Come at once. Duval. Holmes's eyes brightened further. A golden portrait, Watson. And poisoning at a fashionable photographer's studio, no less. Scotland Yard will call it an unfortunate accident with noxious fumes, but I suspect something far more deliberate. Sir Reginald was a prominent art collector with many rivals. Within the hour, we shall see for ourselves. The night air outside was colder than I expected, its chill biting through my coat as we hailed a hansom. In the leather seat felt stiff and damp beneath me, and the horse's harness jingled sharply against the rumble of passing omnibuses on the wet cobblestones. Holmes sat opposite, silent for a time, his pipe relit and filling the confined space with more of that spicy tobacco smoke. It battled the musty fog that seeped in through the cracks. The taste of the evening air on my tongue was metallic and damp, like old pennies mixed with distant chimney soot. Regent Street still buzzed with evening life despite the hour. Gas jets hissed overhead, bathing the grand shop facades in warm yellow light. Ladies in velvet cloaks and gentlemen in evening dress moved between illuminated windows displaying fine wares. We alighted before Duval's studio, an elegant establishment with a large bow window showcasing sample portraits in ornate gilded frames. The sign above read in flowing script, "Henri Duval, artistic photographer, portraits in the modern style." Inside, the atmosphere shifted at once. The air was noticeably warmer, but thick with the acrid tang of photographic chemicals. collodion, silver nitrate, and a sharper metallic bite that stung the back of the throat. The polished wooden floors creaked smoothly under our boots, their surface cool and slightly slippery compared to the rough, damp stone of the street outside. Heavy velvet curtains in deep crimson separated the reception area from the studio proper, where large skylights admitted the last grey remnants of daylight. A group of figures stood clustered near a draped table, a woman in black silk, whose hands twisted a lace handkerchief, two gentlemen in formal attire, and Inspector Lestrade, and his bowler hat clutched tightly in one hand. "Holmes!" Lestrade exclaimed, relief and irritation mixing in his tone. "Thank goodness you've come. Sir Reginald Ashcroft collapsed without warning during the viewing. Dead within minutes. Duval insists it was the fumes from his new experimental gold-toning bath for that portrait over there, but the doctor on the scene isn't convinced. No bitter almond smell or anything obvious." I confess I noticed nothing particularly unusual at first glance. The heavy mahogany camera stood on its tripod like a silent sentinel. Glass plates lay scattered on a side table, and the room smelled strongly of warm leather from the posing chairs and the pervasive chemical sharpness. And though perhaps you, dear reader, were more observant than I in those opening moments and caught what my eye missed. Holmes moved forward with the quiet intensity of a hound, picking up a scent. He knelt beside the body of Sir Reginald, which lay near the table, holding the object of the evening's attention. The golden portrait was indeed striking. A life-sized photograph of a beautiful young woman draped in classical robes, her features rendered in luminous golden tones that seemed to glow softly even in the subdued studio light. The frame was heavily gilded, ornate, and bore a small engraved plaque. "Observe the hands and lips, Watson," Holmes said quietly, without rising from his crouch. His voice carried that familiar precision. "The fingernails show a faint but distinct yellowish staining, not the sort left by brief exposure to developing fluids during a simple demonstration, and the lips slightly swollen, and with a faint residue that is neither ordinary nor accidental." He rose smoothly, brushing dust from his knees. "You know my methods. When you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. Here, accident is impossible. Sir Reginald was a known rival in the secretive world of art acquisition. He had outbid several others for this very piece at a recent auction. Look at Duval's cuffs, similar staining, but fresher and more concentrated. The man claims a simple mishap, yet his own hands tell a different tale." Lestrade scratched his chin. "We've identified 5 people with clear access to the studio that evening. Duval himself, his assistant Miss Eleanor Grant, Sir Reginald's nephew Mr. Cecil Ashcroft, the rival collector Lord Harrington, and a foreigner who introduced himself as Monsieur Leclerc. He's supposedly representing a Paris gallery. Leclerc slipped away shortly after the collapse, which raises questions." Holmes nodded, his fingers steepled briefly as he considered. The leather of a nearby chair creaked softly as he leaned against it. The room's air tasted faintly metallic on the tongue, like old coins, layered beneath the lingering sweetness of the tea and cakes that had evidently been served earlier to the small gathering. From outside came the muffled clatter of carriage wheels on the street and the distant call of a newsboy. As the interviews began in the small adjoining sitting room, its walls papered in rich green damask and a gas fire providing welcome warmth against the evening's growing chill, Duval spoke first. The dapper Frenchman, in his 40s, with carefully waxed moustaches and fingers permanently ink-stained from his work, wrung his hands nervously. His voice carried a light accent tempered by long years in London. "It was the new gold-toning process, Monsieur Holmes. Sir Reginald insisted on seeing how the portrait achieved its extraordinary luminous quality. I demonstrated the bath. One moment he was praising the image, the next he clutched his throat and collapsed. It must have been the fumes." Miss Eleanor Grant, the assistant, stood quietly beside him, She was a composed young woman with intelligent eyes and hands that showed the roughening of both delicate chemical tray work and earlier manual labour. Her voice held the soft lilt of London's East End, tempered by education. Sir Reginald seemed excited, sir. He had just received a letter delivered by hand, something about the portrait's provenance. He read it quickly, then sipped his tea. The portrait was to be the jewel of his collection. Mr. Cecil Ashcroft, the nephew, paced with restless energy. His florid face and straining waistcoat spoke of good living. My uncle chased every shiny treasure that crossed his path. This golden portrait was rumoured to be a revolutionary photographic reproduction of a lost masterpiece, valuable nonsense in my view. But now, well, the inheritance changes things. Lord Harrington, older and more self-possessed, with a voice like gravel beneath carriage wheels, offered a thin smile. A fine piece, certainly. I bid on it myself, but had no need for desperate measures. My own collection is already extensive. The mysterious Leclerc was, as noted, absent. Nick Holmes listened attentively, his pipe occasionally sending forth more fragrant smoke that mingled with the studio's chemical bite and Miss Grant's subtle lavender perfume. The wooden furniture felt solid and cool beneath my hand as I sat. I failed to connect the scattered details then. The precise nature of the staining, the letter mentioned, the rivalries simmering beneath polite words, the significance escaped me entirely. I wonder if it escaped you as well, dear reader. Later, as we prepared to leave the studio and return through the fog-shrouded streets, Holmes drew me aside near the bow window. Outside, the gas lamps glowed softly, and the night air carried the distant tolling of Big Ben, its deep tones vibrating through the damp chill. "The mud on Sir Reginald's boots interests me greatly, Watson," he murmured. "Yeah, reddish clay mixed with fine black dust, not the sort found on Regent Street pavements, and the broken seal on that letter he still carried in his pocket. Small observations, but they speak with remarkable clarity if one knows how to listen." The night felt colder now, the fog pressing closer as we stepped back into the hansom. The horse's breath steamed visibly, and the wheels splashed through puddles reflecting the yellow shop lights. Little did I know how deeply this luminous golden portrait would draw us into the hidden currents of London's art world, its music halls, and the shadowy docks beyond. The mystery had presented itself, and already it pulled us forward into deeper waters. Chapter 2. Into London streets. The following morning dawned grey and raw over London, and with a persistent drizzle that made the pavements slick and gleaming under the gas lamps. At 221B Baker Street, the breakfast table held the comforting aroma of Mrs. Hudson's kedgeree, smoky haddock mingled with spiced rice, while Holmes's strong coffee added its bitter edge. Outside, the ceaseless clatter of hansom cabs splashing through puddles blended with the rhythmic clip-clop of horses' hooves on whetstone and the distant shouts of street vendors. Holmes was already dressed and eager, his eyes bright with purpose. "We must trace the golden portrait's journey through the city's streets, Watson," he declared, folding his napkin. "It was not born in isolation at Duval's studio. Its path will reveal much." Our first destination was the auction house of Messrs. Bettridge and Sons in Bond Street, a short cab ride away. Inside the grand establishment, the air felt cooler and drier, heavy, with the beeswax polish on mahogany tables and the musty scent of old paper from stacked catalogues. The floors were smooth oak that creaked faintly under our boots, cooler than the damp pavement outside. Mr. Simmons, the thin auctioneer with wire-rimmed spectacles, received us in his private office, its walls lined with leather-bound ledgers whose pages felt crisp and slightly brittle to the touch. "Sir Reginald secured the golden portrait in spirited bidding," Simmons explained, his voice echoing softly off the high ceiling. "It came from the estate of a deceased collector in Brighton, described as an experimental photographic reproduction using Monsieur Duval's proprietary gold-toning process. Lord Harrington bid keenly against him, as did that Frenchman, Monsieur Leclerc, Holmes examined the catalogue entry closely, his long fingers tracing the printed text and the provenance documents provided. "Quite standard, sir." Sir Reginald insisted on verifying the piece privately at Duval's studio that same evening. He seemed particularly excited about its supposed link to a lost masterpiece. The paper of the catalogue carried a faint, inky smell, sharp and fresh. We thanked Simmons and stepped back into the drizzle, the cold moisture beading on our coats. Next, we headed toward Leicester Square and the music hall district. The Alhambra Music Hall still carried the lingering odours of the previous night's performances, spilled ale turning sour, cheap floral perfume, and the heavy smoke from dozens of cigars. The velvet seats in the pit were threadbare in patches, like their nap, rough against my palm, as I rested a hand on one. The wooden stage boards creaked hollowly underfoot, and the air tasted faintly of stale beer and sawdust. The manager, a burly man with a hoarse voice from years of shouting over crowds, wiped his hands on a greasy apron. "La Belle Dorée." "Aye, she was a sensation here years ago," he said, his breath carrying the tang of morning tobacco. "Sang like an angel, in a voice as golden as her name. Looked the part too. Beautiful, mysterious, vanished sudden after some to-do with a wealthy admirer. Rumour said she went abroad, but who knows?" He mentioned, in passing, that a young woman named Eleanor Grant had once been part of the chorus at a rival hall before taking up respectable work with a photographer. Her hands, I recalled from the studio, that bore calluses from both stage life and chemical trays. From Leicester Square, our cab carried us eastward to the docks along the Thames. The river slapped rhythmically against the wooden wharves with an oily, churning sound, and the air grew thick with the stench of fish guts, tar from the ships, and the heavy coal smoke billowing from steamers. At low tide, the exposed river mud gave off a salty, decaying odour that clung to the back of the throat. Brick warehouses loomed cold and damp to the touch, their surfaces, rough with age, echoing with the metallic clang of loading cranes and the coarse shouts of stevedores. Holmes's contact, a sharp-eyed warehouseman named Billings, met us amid towering crates stamped with foreign ports. The wooden crates felt splintery and chilled by the river breeze. That portrait plate arrived careful-like on a ship from Calais some 2 months back, Billings muttered, his voice low. One crate seemed lighter than it should have been. Frenchmen involved in the handling, they say. Slippery sort. The taste of salt spray lingered on my lips as we spoke, mixed with the bitter soot in the air. Billings knew little more, but the mention of Leclerc again raised questions. Our final stop that morning took us to a modest photography supplier's premises in Clerkenwell, a busy factory district. The rumble of nearby machinery vibrated through the floorboards, and the air reeked of strong solvents and hot metal from the workshops. The elderly proprietor, a chemist with stained fingers, showed us samples of gold chloride solutions in glass bottles that felt cool and smooth. Dangerous stuff if mishandled. Gentlemen," he wheezed, his breath carrying the faint aroma of shag tobacco, "can cause all manner of ills if it gets into the system, through the skin or otherwise. Monsieur Duval always buys the finest grade from me." Evidence began to accumulate in layers as thick as the morning fog. The portrait's unusual weight suggested perhaps a double plate or hidden element within its ornate frame. Cecil Ashcroft's name surfaced again with hints of heavy gambling debts mentioned casually by the music hall manager. Leclerc's sudden disappearance after the collapse seemed more suspicious with each telling. A torn fragment of a letter found in Sir Reginald's pocket, which Holmes had quietly pocketed, bore a partial French postmark and the scent of cheap ink. As our cab rattled back toward Baker Street in the late afternoon, the streets alive with the calls of newsboys and the warm orange glow of public houses spilling onto the pavements, Holmes sat in thoughtful silence for a time. The drizzle had eased, but the air remained chill and damp, carrying the mixed scents of roasting chestnuts from a corner brazier and the ever-present coal smoke. Consider the facts as we knew them then. the yellowish staining on the fingernails and cuffs, the reddish clay and coal dust on Sir Reginald's boots that spoke of places far from Mayfair, the missing or incomplete provenance document, the rival bidders with clear motives, and the vanished performer from the music halls whose shadow seemed to touch Miss Grant. What would you conclude from such scattered threads? I set down these details precisely as Holmes observed them at the time. The reader may draw their own conclusions before the pattern grows clearer. Questions multiplied with every turning of the cab wheels. The golden portrait, so luminous and beautiful, appeared to conceal secrets far darker than its glowing surface suggested. London's busy streets, from elegant auction rooms to fetid docks, now felt alive with unseen connections and watchful eyes. The intrigue was deepening, pulling us further into its currents. Chapter 3. Deeper Waters. We returned to Duval's studio. The following afternoon, as a thicker fog settled over Regent Street, carrying the damp chill that seeped into one's bones and turned every breath visible. The chemical odors had faded somewhat overnight, replaced by a musty scent of undisturbed velvet draperies and old paper from the portfolios stacked on shelves. The wooden tripod of the large camera felt solid and cool to the touch as I steadied myself beside it, its brass fittings chilled by the indoor air, contrasting with the warmer gas fire in the corner. Holmes examined the gold-toning bath with his magnifying lens held close, his grey eyes sharp. "Observe this crystalline deposit along the rim, Watson. It is not uniform, as one would expect from normal evaporation of a standard gold chloride solution. Someone introduced an additional substance after the demonstration, something that altered the mixture in a deliberate way. Significant evidence came to light when we searched Sir Reginald's personal effects more thoroughly in the adjoining sitting room. Tucked inside his waistcoat pocket was a small, empty phial of thick glass, smooth and cool against my palm. Its stopper carried a faint, as sweet a solvent scent that differed from the sharp metallic bite of Duval's usual chemicals. The yellowish staining on the victim's fingernails appeared more pronounced under the gaslight, matching traces on the portrait's ornate gilded frame. Holmes's reasoning unfolded naturally as we stood by the draped table where the golden portrait still rested. Its luminous surface seemed to glow softly, the classical robes of the depicted beauty rendered in warm golden tones, achieved through the experimental process. The mud on Sir Reginald's boots tells its own story, Watson. Reddish clay mixed with fine black coal dust. That particular combination is found only near certain East End foundries and the more industrial stretches of the Thames docks, not on the polished pavements of Mayfair where he claimed to have spent the evening. His soles betray a nocturnal visit to rougher quarters despite his polished alibi. He paused, the leather of his boots creaking softly on the wooden floor. I encountered similar discrepancies years ago in that troubling affair of the missing naval treaty. A respectable gentleman swore he had passed a quiet evening at his club, yet the distinctive mud on his footwear revealed a secret journey along the river at low tide. The streets and banks of London leave their indelible marks upon a man, whether he wishes it recorded or not. The ground, like a faithful witness, remembers every step. I did not understand the full implication then, though I fancy some readers may have already guessed the direction in which these observations pointed so clearly. Complications arose soon after when Mr. Cecil Ashcroft burst into the studio, and his florid face flushed and his voice raised in bluster about inheritance rights and the immediate release of the portrait. Lord Harrington sent a curt note by messenger claiming prior claim on the piece due to an earlier verbal agreement. Meanwhile, a wire arrived from our contact at the docks. Leclerc had been seen briefly inquiring after shipping records before vanishing again into the river mists. A brief reference to past experience came as Holmes paced the studio floor, the gas lamps hissing gently overhead and casting long shadows across the polished wood. He spoke conversationally of a similar intrigue involving forged artworks smuggled through theatrical troupes in the East End, where a performer's stage Grease paint and costumes had concealed far more than mere theatrical persona. The connection felt relevant here, with the portrait's ties to the vanished music hall beauty known as La Belle Dorée. The signs had been present from the beginning, hidden in plain sight, the portrait frame slightly heavier on one side as if concealing something within. Miss Grant's evident reluctance to discuss her earlier days in the chorus lines, and the foreigner's accent that slipped once or twice into something less Parisian. The answer lay before us if only one knew where to look. New understanding began to dawn as we prepared to leave the studio once more. The evening air outside felt noticeably cooler against our faces after the warmer interior, carrying the distant strains of a barrel organ from a nearby street and the ever-present rumble of carriage wheels on wet cobblestones. The golden portrait was clearly no mere artwork or innocent photographic experiment. It served as a clever vessel for something far more valuable and far more deadly, drawing us deeper into hidden currents of rivalry, deception, and international shadows that stretched beyond the elegant facades of Regent Street. Chapter 4. Shadows and Suspicions. The days that followed blurred into a whirlwind of short revealing scenes across the varied face of London. We began at the Ashcroft townhouse in Mayfair, where thick Persian carpets felt soft and luxurious underfoot, muffling our steps. The air inside carried the scent of beeswax polish on fine furniture and the fading sweetness of cut flowers in crystal vases. Mr. Cecil Ashcroft received us in the drawing room, his florid face glistening with perspiration, despite the cool draught from the tall windows. He protested his innocence too loudly. In clutching a glass of brandy whose fiery warmth I politely declined. I was nowhere near any foundry or dock that night, he insisted, his voice rising. My uncle and I had our differences over money, yes, but murder, preposterous. That golden portrait was just another of his foolish obsessions. Holmes listened quietly, his fingers steepled, noting the tremor in Cecil's hands and the faint reddish dust clinging to the cuffs of his otherwise immaculate coat. From Mayfair, we moved to a smoky public house near the Thames docks, where the wooden benches felt rough and worn, their surfaces sticky from spilled ale. The air was thick with the malty warmth of beer, the sharp tang of cheap tobacco, and the underlying brine of the river seeping through the walls. Lord Harrington sat at a corner table, composed but watchful, his gravelly voice cutting through the low murmur of dock workers and the clink of glasses. "I bid on the portrait, certainly," he admitted, sipping his pint, "but I have no need for desperate acts. My collection is already substantial. Sir Reginald was a rival, not an enemy, though, I will say, his methods of acquisition were sometimes questionable." The taste of the smoky atmosphere lingered on my tongue as we left, the cold river breeze outside a sharp contrast to the pub's stuffy warmth. A tense exchange followed at the Alhambra Music Hall during a quiet afternoon rehearsal. The stage smelled of sawdust and old grease paint, the velvet curtains rough and dusty to the touch. Former colleagues of La Belle Dorée spoke reluctantly, their voices echoing in the empty auditorium over the distant clatter of scene painters' tools. One chorus girl, her hands rough from costume work, revealed that Miss Eleanor Grant had once been close to the vanished performer. Eleanor was her confidant, she whispered, always whispering about big plans and rich gentlemen. Then La Belle disappeared, and Eleanor suddenly became respectable behind a camera. False leads pulled us in several directions. A report placed Leclerc at a busy railway station, but the description proved mistaken upon closer inquiry. The man seen had different boots and no trace of chemical staining on his hands. Another lead took us to a warehouse fire that initially seemed connected, yet proved mere arson for insurance, its blackened timbers still warm and reeking of charred wood and paraffin. Tension built steadily as an anonymous note was slipped under the door at Baker Street that evening. The coarse paper felt cheap and gritty, smelling strongly of cheap ink and the damp fog outside. It read, simply, "Leave the golden matter alone, or join Ashcroft in the dark." Holmes examined it under the lamp, his eyes gleaming. The handwriting is disguised, but the pressure on the pen reveals a nervous hand. Interesting. We scrutinized each suspect in turn during these scattered investigations. Duval grew increasingly agitated in his studio, his waxed moustaches twitching as he demonstrated the gold toning process again, the chemicals stinging the air with their metallic bite. Miss Grant remained quiet and watchful, her lavender perfume faint beneath the studio smells, her roughened hands steady as she handled delicate glass plates. Cecil's gambling debts surfaced repeatedly in quiet conversations with his club acquaintances. And while Lord Harrington's polished composure cracked only once when pressed about a past dealing with French agents, 3 men had clear opportunity that fateful evening at the studio. 3 carried motives tied to the portrait's hidden value or the secrets it might contain. Which would you suspect? First, I wonder. I confess I was quite lost among the shifting shadows and conflicting accounts. Were you any clearer on the matter? The net appeared to be closing slowly around the truth, yet the golden portrait still smiled enigmatically from its frame whenever we returned to it, its luminous surface holding secrets that refused to yield easily. London streets, from elegant drawing rooms to smoky docksides, now felt charged with suspicion and unspoken threats. The mystery tightened its grip with every passing hour. In Chapter 6, The Past Speaks. The next 2 days were spent piecing together the criminal backgrounds that lay hidden beneath the surface of polite London society. We visited narrow streets in the East End slums, where the air hung heavy with the sour smell of cabbage water, damp brick, and unwashed laundry flapping on lines strung between buildings. The cobblestones felt uneven and slick underfoot, and the low voices of residents carried a wary edge as Holmes asked careful questions about a woman once known as La Belle Dorée. From there we moved to a quiet ward in a charitable hospital near Whitechapel, where the corridors smelled strongly of carbolic acid and boiled linens. The starched sheets felt stiff and cool to the touch as we spoke with an elderly dresser who had once treated chorus girls from the music halls. She remembered Eleanor Grant well. She came in with bruises and a story about a fall on stage, the old woman said, her voice thin but clear. But the marks looked more like rough handling by a gentleman. After that, she disappeared for months, then reappeared as a respectable photographer's assistant. Clever girl, that one. Criminal details gradually emerged. La Belle Dorée, whose real name was indeed Eleanor Grant, had fled a scandal involving stolen jewels that had been cleverly disguised as theatrical props and paste imitations during performances. The golden portrait was no innocent artwork. It was a masterful forgery containing micro-photograph documents, secret correspondence, and maps intended for foreign agents operating in London. The luminous gold toning had served the dual purpose of beauty and concealment. A motive became clearer as the layers unfolded. Sir Reginald Ashcroft had not been killed merely for the portrait's monetary value. During the private viewing, he had discovered the hidden negative and the true nature of the documents. In his excitement, he had threatened immediate exposure, not to the police, but to his influential friends in government circles. That decision sealed his fate. The slow-acting compound in the tea, combined with skin absorption from handling the treated frame, ensured he would not live long enough to act on his discovery. Connections formed across the scattered suspects with surprising neatness. Leclerc was no simple gallery representative, but a courier for the foreign network. Lord Harrington had been an unwitting bidder, and drawn in by the portrait's supposed artistic merit, while his own collection unknowingly contained other pieces from the same tainted source. Cecil Ashcroft, deep in gambling debts, had been approached as a potential pawn to help move the portrait after the murder, though he had not known the full extent of the scheme. In the quieter moments between these inquiries, I found myself reflecting on how far the case had taken us. From the elegant, chemical-scented studio on Regent Street to the tar and brine reek of the docks, from the sawdust and grease paint atmosphere of the music hall to the carbolic sharpness of the hospital ward. The golden portrait had drawn us through every level of the city. Beauty had masked greed, and art had become a weapon in shadows most Londoners never saw. But the signs had been there from our very first visit to the studio. The unusual weight of the frame, the hesitation in Miss Grant's voice when speaking of her past, the mud on Sir Reginald's boots that spoke of places he should not have visited, and the fresh staining on Duval's cuffs. In hindsight, we should have known. The clues were there, hidden in plain sight for anyone who looked with Holmes's keen eye. As evening fell on the second day, we returned. The sitting room felt warm and welcoming after the day's chill wanderings, the fire crackling and sending the pleasant aroma of burning applewood into the air. Holmes stood by the mantel, violin in hand, drawing a few soft notes that mingled with the distant rumble of carriages outside. "The pieces are connecting at last, Watson," he said quietly, lowering the bow. "Nick, tomorrow we shall bring them all together. The past has spoken clearly now, and its voice points directly to the heart of the matter." The river continued to murmur its ancient secrets beyond the rooftops, but inside 221B, the threads of the mystery were finally drawing tight. The golden portrait's luminous smile no longer concealed its deadly purpose. Pietrus objects. The truth emerges. The confrontation took place the following evening back at Duval's studio on Regent Street. Gas lamps hissed softly overhead, casting a steady warm glow across the polished wooden floors and the deep crimson velvet curtains. The air still carried the faint metallic tang of chemicals mixed with the richer scent of fresh pipe tobacco from Holmes's bowl. The golden portrait stood on its easel in the center of the room, its luminous surface reflecting the light in a way that seemed almost mocking now that its secrets were known. Holmes had arranged for everyone to be present. Duval fidgeted with his waxed moustaches. Miss Eleanor Grant stood pale but composed beside him. Cecil Ashcroft paced restlessly, his boots creaking on the floorboards, and Lord Harrington sat stiffly in a chair, his face set in rigid lines. Lestrade waited near the door with two constables, the leather of their belts creaking as they shifted. Leclerc had been brought in under guard, his hands bound, the chill night air still clinging to his coat. Holmes stood before the portrait, his tall figure casting a long shadow. He spoke calmly, letting the facts unfold through clear dialogue rather than dramatic pronouncement. "Let us begin with the poison, gentlemen. It was not the developing fumes as Monsieur Duval claimed. The compound was a rare photographic sensitizer, deliberately mixed into Sir Reginald's tea and further absorbed through the skin when he handled the treated frame. The yellowish staining on the fingernails and the slight swelling of the lips were unmistakable once one knew what to look for. Slow-acting, subtle and deadly, designed to allow the victim to collapse after leaving the studio so that the death might appear natural or accidental. Duval's face drained of color. "But the bath, I demonstrated it myself." "Precisely," Holmes continued, turning to him. "You demonstrated it, but the fatal dose had already been administered earlier in the tea. Your own cuffs carried fresher traces because you handled the frame again after the collapse to remove evidence. Observe the crystalline deposit on the bath rim. It does not match normal evaporation." He moved to the portrait and carefully lifted the heavy gilded frame. The true purpose of this beautiful object was concealment. Inside lies a second negative plate containing micro-photograph documents and a map of smuggling routes. Sir Reginald discovered this during the viewing. The letter he received that evening warned him of the deception. In his excitement, he threatened to expose the entire network. That sealed his fate. Miss Grant, once La Belle Dorée, lifted her chin, her voice steady but quiet. "And what of my part in this, Mr. Holmes?" "Your past in the music halls provided the perfect cover, Miss Grant. The jewels stolen years ago were moved as theatrical props. The golden portrait continued that tradition, art as a vessel for espionage. You supplied the image and assisted in preparing the plates. Leclerc here acted as courier for foreign interests. Lord Harrington was drawn in as a legitimate bidder to give the sale respectability, while Cecil Ashcroft's debts made him a potential pawn to move the piece afterward. Cecil stopped pacing, his face flushing. I knew nothing of documents or spies. I only wanted my inheritance. Exactly, Holmes replied. Your bluster and gambling provided a convenient red herring. The mud on Sir Reginald's boots, reddish clay with coal dust, proved he had visited the docks earlier that day to verify the shipment. He was not the naive collector he appeared. Lord Harrington cleared his throat. This is outrageous, I bid in good faith. And in ignorance, Holmes said mildly. Your collection contains other tainted pieces from the same source. The network used beauty and fashion to mask its work. Leclerc snarled something in French, but Lestrade stepped forward. Enough! You're all coming with me. Reactions rippled through the room. Duval sank into a chair, head in hands. Miss Grant met Holmes's gaze with quiet defiance mixed with resignation. Cecil blustered until a constable took his arm. Lord Harrington sat very still, the colour slowly draining from his face as the implications settled. Holmes turned to me as the arrests began. The truth, when it emerges, is often simpler than the elaborate web it hides behind, Watson. The portrait was both lure and weapon. Sir Reginald's discovery made him dangerous, and the studio provided the perfect setting for a crime disguised as artistic misfortune. I watched as the group was led out into the night. The cool air rushed in through the open door, carrying the distant rumble of carriages and the faint call of a late newsboy. Nothing in my long experience with Holmes had prepared me for the elegant precision with which he had unravelled this particular tangle. The luminous golden portrait, once so captivating, now stood revealed as the instrument of a darker design. Holmes saw the truth immediately. I wonder how many of you, dear reader, saw it too as the pieces slowly aligned. Justice had begun its work. The studio, once filled with the promise of art and light, now felt empty and still, the gas lamps hissing softly as if sighing in relief. The case had reached its turning point, and London's shadows seemed a little less impenetrable. Chapter 8. Justice dawn was breaking over London with a pale, watery light. When the arrests were completed, the streets still carried the damp chill of night, and a thin mist rose from the pavements as constables led the prisoners away from Duval's studio. The clatter of the police wagon's wheels on the cobblestones echoed sharply in the quiet morning air, mingling with the distant calls of milkmen and the first stirrings of the city. Inside the studio, the gas lamps had been turned low, leaving the golden portrait standing alone on its easel like a silent witness to the unfolding consequences. Inspector Lestrade adjusted his bowler hat, his face showing a mixture of satisfaction and lingering irritation. Well, Holmes, you've done it again. Duval has already started talking. He admits adding the sensitizer to the tea at Miss Grant's suggestion. The compound was meant to act slowly so the death would look like a heart attack or chemical accident later that night. Duval, his once dapper appearance now dishevelled, sat handcuffed on a velvet chair. His voice trembled as he responded to Lestrade's questions. I only wanted the money. The foreign gentleman promised a fortune for safe delivery of the documents. Sir Reginald discovered the hidden plate and threatened to ruin everything. Eleanor said the poison would be gentle, painless. I never meant for it to end like this. Miss Eleanor Grant, formerly La Belle Dorée, stood beside him with quiet dignity. The rough texture of the handcuffs contrasted sharply with her smooth skin. She spoke softly, her East End lilt more noticeable now. The jewels started it years ago in the music halls. We learned how to hide valuable things in plain sight. The golden portrait was the perfect vessel, beautiful enough to distract even a collector like Sir Reginald. I prepared the plates. Leclerc handled the foreign side. It was business, nothing more. Leclerc spat a curse in French, his face twisted with anger. The cold morning air drifting through the open door made him shiver in his thin coat. You English think you are so clever. The documents would have changed everything. Now it is all lost. Lord Harrington, still composed but visibly shaken, was questioned separately in the adjoining room. The leather chair creaked under his weight as he sat rigidly. I swear I knew nothing of the espionage. I bid on the portrait because it was exquisite. My collection. Some pieces may have come from the same tainted source, but I was deceived. His voice carried the gravelly tone we had heard before, now edged with genuine dismay. Cecil Ashcroft, the most vocal of the group, protested loudly as he was escorted out. This is an outrage. I only wanted my uncle's money. The gambling debts. They pressed me, yes, but murder, I had no idea about any documents or spies. His boots left faint traces of the same reddish clay we had noticed earlier. A final ironic detail. Holmes stood by the window, watching the wagon depart. His pipe sent slow curls of fragrant Latakia tobacco into the air, its spicy aroma battling the lingering chemical bite that still clung to the studio. The network was larger than these few, Lestrade. The golden portrait was only one piece in a chain of smuggling that stretched from Paris to the London docks. The micro-photographed maps pointed to several caches. Your men will find more when they search the warehouses Billings mentioned. Questions that had puzzled us for days now found clear answers. The reddish clay and coal dust on Sir Reginald's boots had come from his secret visit to the docks earlier that evening to verify the shipment. The broken seal on the letter had contained a warning about the forgery. The unusual weight of the frame had hidden the second negative plate. Even the music hall connection had been key. Miss Grant's past had given her both the skills and the contacts needed for such clever concealment. The impact on others began to show as the morning progressed. Sir Reginald's household staff, gathered later at the townhouse, reacted with a mixture of shock and quiet relief. The old butler, his hands trembling slightly as he poured tea, whose steam carried a comforting malty aroma, expressed sorrow for his master, but gratitude that the truth had emerged. He was a good man, sir, though obsessed with his treasures. At least his name will not be tarnished by scandal. Miss Grant's former colleagues at the Alhambra sent word through a messenger boy whose cap smelled of street dust and damp wool. Some expressed sadness for the path she had chosen, while others admitted they had suspected her sudden respectability hid something darker. By midday, order began to return in small ways. The golden portrait was taken into official custody, its luminous beauty now dimmed by its role in the crime. Holmes and I walked back toward Baker Street through streets that felt lighter somehow. The air carried the fresh scent of baking bread from a nearby shop, mixed with the earthy damp of the morning mist and the sharp tang of horses on the road. The temperature had risen slightly, taking the worst bite from the autumn chill. Cecil Ashcroft would likely face lesser charges related to his knowledge of the debts and attempted interference, but he was already cleared of direct involvement in the poisoning. Lord Harrington's collection would be examined, though his ignorance appeared genuine. The main perpetrators, Duval, Miss Grant and Leclerc, faced serious consequences for murder and espionage. Nothing prepared me for this, dear reader. The way seeing one beautiful object could twist the lives of so many, turning art into a weapon and ambition into poison. The golden portrait had promised light and wonder, and instead it had delivered darkness and justice in equal measure. As we turned into Baker Street, the familiar sight of 221B brought a sense of closure. The case had reached its legal beginning, with consequences still unfolding across London. The shadows that had gathered around the luminous image were finally lifting, leaving only the quiet satisfaction of truth revealed and order slowly restored. Chapter 9. Restoration. The legal proceedings moved with surprising speed for a case involving murder and foreign intrigue. In the weeks that followed the arrests, the Old Bailey courtroom echoed with measured voices and the rustle of legal papers. The air inside carried the faint, musty scent of polished oak benches and old leather-bound law books, their surfaces smooth and cool beneath nervous fingers. Gas lamps hissed softly overhead, encasting a steady light that contrasted with the grey autumn chill pressing against the tall windows. Sir Reginald's murder was presented clearly. The deliberate poisoning through the tea and the treated portrait frame, the hidden micro-photograph documents, and the network that had used beauty as its most effective disguise. Duval, Miss Eleanor Grant, and Leclerc received the heavier sentences. Their faces showed varying shades of resignation as the judge pronounced judgment. Duval's waxed moustaches no longer seemed dapper. They drooped as he stared at the floor. Miss Grant maintained a quiet dignity to the end. Her hands, once roughened by both stage work and chemicals, now folded calmly in her lap. Leclerc muttered bitterly in French until silenced. The evidence Holmes had gathered proved decisive. The yellowish staining in the mismatched crystalline deposits, the mud on the boots, and the second negative plate hidden within the gilded frame. Cecil Ashcroft fared better. Cleared of any direct role in the poisoning, he faced only minor charges related to his attempts to interfere with the investigation and his knowledge of the gambling debts that had made him vulnerable. He emerged from the proceedings a chastened man, his florid face paler than usual. In the corridor outside the court, he approached Holmes and me, his voice subdued amid the echo of footsteps on the stone floor. "I was a fool," he admitted, the wool of his coat feeling coarse as he brushed it nervously, "chasing money while darker things moved around me. Thank you for seeing the truth. The inheritance is mine now, but it feels tainted. I intend to sell most of Uncle's collection and live more quietly." Lord Harrington, fully vindicated and cleared of any knowing involvement, expressed his gratitude in a short note delivered by a liveried servant. The paper smelled faintly of good ink and sealing wax. He planned to have his own collection thoroughly examined and purged of any suspect pieces. "Your insight has saved me from further embarrassment," he wrote. "The art world owes you a debt." The innocent were truly cleared, and futures began to show glimmers of new possibility. Sir Reginald's household staff found stability under Cecil's reformed management. The old butler, whom we met again at the townhouse, poured tea with steadier hands. The brew carried a comforting malty warmth that cut through the chill of the drawing room, and where fresh flowers now replaced the fading ones. "The house feels lighter, gentlemen," he said quietly, "as if a shadow has lifted." Miss Grant's former friends in the music halls heard the full story through quiet channels. Some expressed sorrow for the path she had chosen, while a few younger performers took caution from her fall. One chorus girl we encountered near Leicester Square, her cheap perfume mingling with the smoky air of the district, said simply, "Beauty can hide too many sins. We'll be more careful now." Normalcy slowly returned. Mrs. Hudson's breakfasts once again filled the sitting room with the rich aroma of kedgeree and fresh toast, the butter melting warmly on the tongue. The fire crackled with the pleasant scent of applewood, and Holmes's violin sang softly in the evenings, its notes rising above the distant rumble of carriages and the occasional toll of Big Ben. The chemical bottles on the shelves caught the light, no longer tied to a deadly studio experiment. I often found myself reflecting on the case in quiet moments. The golden portrait, once so captivating with its luminous tones, had revealed how easily art could be twisted into a tool of greed and espionage, from the elegant Regent Street studio to the tar-stained docks, from the sawdust-scented music hall to the solemn courtroom. The investigation had shown the many faces of London. Holmes had moved through it all with his customary precision, turning scattered observations into unassailable truth. The golden portrait itself was now safely in official hands, its secrets exposed and its beauty preserved only as evidence. Plans were discussed to return any legitimate artistic value to public collections, ensuring Sir Reginald's passion for art would not be entirely lost to darkness. In the end, order was restored. The network's threads had been cut, the guilty held accountable, and the innocent given back their peace. London continued its ceaseless rhythm. Cabs splashing through puddles, street vendors calling their wares, the Thames flowing steadily past the warehouses, largely unaware of the small victory achieved in its shadows. Subtly, I wondered whether others who followed the public accounts of the case had noticed the same small signs that had first puzzled me. The weight of the frame, the hesitation in certain voices, the mud that told its own story. The restoration felt complete, yet the memory of that luminous golden image lingered, set a reminder that even the brightest surfaces can hide the deepest shadows. Chapter 10. Baker Street Reflections. The fire crackled cheerfully in the sitting room at 221B Baker Street, filling the air with the pleasant woody aroma of burning apple logs. Late afternoon light filtered through the windows, softened by the familiar autumn haze that still lingered over London. Mrs. Hudson had brought up a fresh pot of tea, its fragrant steam rising in gentle curls that mingled with the richer scent of Holmes's pipe tobacco. A mellow blend, this time, less sharp than his usual latakia. The leather armchair felt comfortably worn beneath me, its surface warm from the fire's glow, while outside the distant rumble of carriages and the faint call of a street vendor drifted up from the street below. Holmes sat opposite me, long legs stretched toward the hearth, his eyes half closed in rare contentment. The golden portrait case had finally faded from the daily newspapers, replaced by fresher scandals and political stirrings. A copy of the evening paper lay on the table, its ink still carrying that sharp, fresh smell. The headlines confirmed the sentences. Duval and Leclerc transported for life. Miss Grant facing long imprisonment, and the network's remaining threads quietly unravelled by Lestrade's men at the docks. "News from the yard this morning," Holmes remarked, tapping ash from his pipe into the tray. The metal tray felt cool against his fingers. They recovered 3 more caches using the coordinates from the hidden plate. French agents are in some disarray. Sir Reginald's collection is being catalogued properly now, free of any tainted pieces. Cecil Ashcroft has already sold several questionable items and speaks of travelling abroad to clear his head. I poured more tea, the liquid hot and comforting on the tongue, with a subtle, malty sweetness that cut through the smoky air. It feels strange to see it all settled. That luminous portrait drew us through so many corners of London. The chemical shop studio, the tar and brine docks, the grease paint-scented music hall, even the solemn chill of the courtroom. One beautiful object, and so much darkness beneath its gold. Holmes nodded, his gaze drifting to the violin resting on the mantel. He picked it up absently, drawing the bow across the strings in a few soft, contemplative notes. The sound rose clear and sweet, vibrating gently through the room and contrasting with the muffled city noises outside. The clip-clop of horses, then the distant whistle of a train and the low murmur of pedestrians. Beauty is often the most effective mask, Watson. People see what they wish to see. Sir Reginald saw a masterpiece. We saw the weight of the frame, the staining on the hands, the mud that betrayed his secret journey. The past spoke clearly, once we listened. We sat in companionable silence for a time. The fire warmed the air pleasantly, a welcome contrast to the damp chill that still clung to the streets below. I could taste the faint smokiness of the tea on my lips, mixed with the ever-present hint of coal smoke drifting in from the chimney. Holmes's fingers moved with easy precision on the violin, producing a gentle melody that seemed to weave together the threads of the case in sound rather than words. "Looking back," I said after a while, the signs were scattered like leaves across the city. The reddish clay on the boots, the hesitation in Miss Grant's voice when speaking of her music hall days, the unusual weight of that gilded frame. I confess I missed their full meaning for longer than I should have. Perhaps those who followed this account from the beginning saw the pattern sooner than I did. Holmes smiled faintly, lowering the violin. "You did well, as always, my dear Watson. Your notes kept the details precise when my mind raced ahead. The case was never truly about the portrait's beauty. It was about how greed and intrigue can hide in the most elegant places: a fashionable studio, an auction room, even a music hall stage. The golden tones were merely the lure. As evening deepened, the room grew cozier. Mrs. Hudson brought a simple supper of cold meats and bread, and the crust, crisp, and the butter, rich and smooth. The taste lingered pleasantly after the tea's warmth. Outside, the gas lamps were being lit, their soft hissing audible even from our height, casting yellow pools on the pavements below. Big Ben tolled in the distance, its deep tones rolling across the rooftops like a final punctuation to the day. We spoke a little longer of broader matters, how London continued its ceaseless rhythm, largely unaware of the small battles fought in its shadows. The docks still bustled with ships and crates, the music halls rang with laughter and song, and the art world turned to new treasures, perhaps a touch more cautious after the scandal. Holmes reflected that such cases reminded him why he remained in Baker Street, not for fame, but for the intellectual chase and the satisfaction of restoring order when chaos threatened. To those who have followed this account through its many turns, from the first urgent telegram to the final sentencing, I offer a quiet word. The truth often lies not in the obvious blaze of light, but in the small, overlooked details: a stain on a cuff, mud on a boot, a hesitation in the voice. Holmes taught me that lesson again and again, and I pass it on with the humility of one who frequently missed what was hidden in plain sight. May your own observations serve you better than mine sometimes did. The fire settled into glowing embers, casting a warm, ruddy light across the Persian rug and the scattered papers of the case, now neatly filed away. Holmes resumed playing the violin, the melody soft and reflective, rising and falling like the river that had witnessed so much of the affair. The chill of the autumn night pressed gently against the window panes, but inside 221B Baker Street, all was warmth, quiet satisfaction, and the comfortable companionship that had seen us through so many adventures. The case of the golden portrait was closed. Its luminous image, once so captivating, had revealed its secrets and returned to history. London moved on, as it always does, beneath its veil of fog and gaslight, and we, in our rooms above the bustling street, found peace once more in the familiar rhythms.